Well, good evening. Welcome to our midweek service. Take your hymnals, if you would, number 605. Oh, it is wonderful to be a Christian. A good theme reminder for us to sing on a Wednesday night. Life has purpose now it never had before. There's meaning to each day and even more. A joy and peace I can't explain is mine, since I found new life in Christ my Lord divine. Some of you were able to be with us at Mrs. Wilson's funeral earlier this morning, and certainly there's grief on the human level over the loss, but whenever there's a funeral of a believer, there's incredible joy too. And that was the case this morning, and the hope, and it's wonderful for us to be able to be here tonight, to be followers of Christ. Let's stand together, number 605. We'll sing all three stanzas.
Life has purpose now and never had before. There is meaning to each day and even more. For a joy and peace I can't explain is mine. Since I found new life in Christ my Lord divine. Oh, it's wonderful to be a Christian. Oh, it's wonderful to be God's son. Oh, it's wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it's wonderful to be redeemed, justified forever in His Son. I can go directly to the Lord in prayer. He has told me I may boldly enter there. And He listens as His promises I plead. I find mercy there and grace for every need. Oh, it's wonderful to be a Christian. Oh, it's wonderful to be God's son. Oh, it's wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it's wonderful to be redeemed, justified forever in His Son. And the hope of heaven's glory thrills me so. Where I'll live with Christ forever, Lord, I know. That is why the things of earth I loosely hold. I'm eternal riches better far than gold. Oh, it's wonderful to be a Christian. Oh, it's wonderful to be God's son. Oh, it's wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it's wonderful to be redeemed, justified forever in God's Son. Amen. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, thanking Him for the service tonight, asking His blessing on the offering as our men come. Brother Tim Berry, would you lead us in that, please?
Father, we thank you for what you've done for us in Christ. And thank you that through His work on the cross, we can be forever reconciled to you. We pray that we would not lose the excitement of that, the joy of it. We pray that you would take the service tonight and use it to provoke us to love and good works. Give us the encouragement we need. We pray now for your blessing on the offering. In Jesus' name.
Amen. You may be seated. Truly, His grace is amazing, and we'll never lose the awe, the joy of that, I trust. Great is thy faithfulness. Number 26 in your hymnals. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father, Lord, unto me. Great faithfulness. We'll sing the first verse. Let's stand again once again to sing just the first verse and the chorus. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, mercies I see. All I have been in thy hand, provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Thank you. You may be seated.
Well, just a reminder that this coming Lord's Day, our Sunday school Bible study fellowship hour will be the same. And of course, our morning worship service. And then we are going to have a pizza lunch together after the morning service. And you could bring a side and a dessert, or you could bring chips and a dessert. That's probably the way to do that. Those are suggestions, of course. We'll have pizza as the main thing. And then we're going to come back in here fairly quickly, and we're going to have an afternoon service, and we'll have a couple of our teen young men preaching in that afternoon service. So we're looking forward to that. And that will be it for Sunday. So don't come back in the evening at 6 o'clock, all right? And we're looking forward to that day. That is in light of the fact that a number of us have dovetailing the school. Bob Jones are both on spring break, and so some will be traveling and trying to get a chance to get our time in together before we start to go different directions, if that applies to you. All right, anyone with a birthday this week, today through next Tuesday? Anyone in that category? We've got a couple. I'm going to get Josh first. Josh, when is your birthday? Sunday. And is this 21 or 22? 20? What a youngster he is. All right. Oh, he got a good jump. Are you you're graduating this spring, aren't you? He's brilliant too. Good looking, brilliant, you know. Part of a state championship basketball team. What more do you need right there? We are thankful for Josh and the encouragement he is here. Born where? Okay, North Carolina. Mrs. Packard, when is your birthday? It is Saturday. Do you mind telling us how many? You don't have to. Okay. Yes, how many years? 89 she will turn on Saturday. And where were you born? Ohio. Yes. There's some cheers. I know you probably can't see and hear them, but there are people cheering around you about Ohio. So we are so thankful for you. You are a great blessing to us week by week, and thankful for your testimony. And anyone else? Is that it? I'm seeing some pointing. Oh, we better have you stand. And last Saturday, how old would you have been? 11. Turned 11. Wow, that's exciting. Was there any highlight from your birthday? Special present or a fever? Oh, sorry. Well, you're healthier now at least. We're glad for that. Anything else? Okay. Gift cards you can choose what to do with are really nice, right? All right. Well, anyone else? I thought I saw some pointing, but all right, we'll sing to these three then tonight. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, God bless you. Happy birthday to you. Amen. Thank the Lord for each of you. And anyone with an anniversary in this stretch? Anyone at all? All right. We're going to dismiss the kids for truth. And a great group. Appreciate again all that work with them. And we will dismiss the teenagers to time with the youth group. And I want to invite all those that are staying in here with us tonight to turn in your Bibles to Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31. And I am taking us tonight to where we finished the service this morning in celebration of the life of Mrs. Wilson. And due to both the short notice, she passed away Monday, and the funeral was Wednesday, so short notice, and the timing of it this morning, most of you were not able to be there this morning. I am seeing of those that are still in here, Dr. Barry and my wife, and was there anyone else that's still in here? Mrs. Seymour and Mrs. Beatles, all right? You're not sitting in your normal place, Jen. How can I? You guys move around, I don't know where to direct my preaching to, at key times, so it threw me. All right, well, you're going to hear some repeated accounts, but as the day went on, I was more and more burdened to take a few minutes tonight and rehearse the grace of God in Mrs. Wilson's life and receive a challenge. And I want us to just read, to start with tonight, Proverbs 31, starting at verse 10, and read down through verse 31. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good, and not evil, all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth a field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. And I want to relate some of the story of her life, and I think you'll make multiple connections to what we just read along the way, and then finish with a brief look at what the root was of what was commendable in her. So Virginia, and most of us probably didn't even know that was her name, Virginia Setzer, born January 4th, 1934 in Franklin, North Carolina. She was one of 8 children, and all 10 in that family lived in a 2-bedroom farmhouse on Muskrat Road, far removed from town. And they only went to town typically once a month to buy sugar, and the kids were trying to think of what the other couple of necessities were that they heard that they would go to buy. Everything else, from the various meats that they raised, to the milk and cheese and butter, the vegetables, and really we could go on. Nearly everything you could think of that came from the farm. And she did regularly milk a cow or two before heading off to school with her siblings. And all that kind of lifestyle started her down a path of being very frugal. And I'm going to come back to that, but it would totally fit the frugality of the husband that she ended up marrying as well. One of the lesser known facts about her early years, and I think she'd only mentioned this to me once in passing, and I got to talk to the kids about it, but she played high school basketball. And she actually acknowledged that she wasn't the most skilled on the team, but she was known for all-out hustling and competing. And there's actually a little episode she talked about the first day of high school basketball practice. Ball was going towards the sideline and ended up around some chairs, but she was going for it, and her, the ball, and the chairs all went flying. And she actually had a friend that she said, "You were just trying to impress the coach." But she was known for that. And I just found it really interesting. Her own acknowledgement, she wasn't the most skilled, but she actually served as a captain for all 4 years of high school basketball. It says something just about her credibility in terms of hard work even then. Another interesting fact from her early years was that in her high school yearbook, sometimes they'll put what the seniors say they want to do. And she had down nursing, and she also had down social work. And the nursing she absolutely did, but we were just reflecting on that social work comment. It was fulfilled in the greatest of social work as alongside of her husband doing Great Commission ministry in people all of her life. The most important aspect, of course, of her early years actually kind of spills into the later years, so we'll get a little ahead and then come back. But she was raised actually in a Methodist home and church where there was significant emphasis on being morally good and, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And there were these various emphases like that, but there wasn't clear proclamation of the gospel. And it was through her nursing school in Knoxville, Tennessee, that she got exposed to Tennessee Temple. Again, I'm going to come back to some of this, meeting her husband and so on. But she ended up serving alongside of her husband as a pastor's wife. And it was about 5 years into their ministry when she really came to grips with the fact that she was a sinner that needed a Savior. And she knew all along that she wasn't perfect, but she really thought she was a pretty good girl and a pretty good person. And it was when the gospel really gripped her heart that she confessed that she wasn't a good person. even as being a pastor's wife didn't make her a good person. And she was really gripped that she was a sinner, and that needed a Savior completely outside of her. So the kids even remark about that. Their daughter was a little over 5, and just again has some memories of the pastor's wife getting saved, and the whole church learning of that and rejoicing in it. But it's interesting just reflecting back on that. The fact that she came by the gospel to recognize the extent of her need is part of why, and certainly probably the greatest reason why there was so much joy in her for all of these years. And she loved to sing. Kids described her as a hummer when she wasn't singing or listening to music. But I remember looking down and just when others were doing the choir and others were doing prepared music, just she was beaming. And Samuel made a comment about several times catching her when it was just instrumental number, but her mouth was moving because the instruments were playing and she's singing. But all that joy, Jesus said about one of the occasions where a lady is wiping, his feet with her hair, that he that is forgiven much does what? Loves much. And that was really the testimony of Mrs. Wilson. Well, it's appropriate to think of the rest of her life really in the context of Genesis 2 and verse 18, where God said it is not good that man should be alone. And he made a helpmeet for Adam, a helper who was fit for him and completed him and partnered with him. And that was certainly Virginia's greatest treasure, was to be a helpmeet to James Wilson. They met after, well, again, I'll back up. She was a student at the East Tennessee Baptist School of Nursing in Knoxville. Wasn't affiliated at all with Tennessee Temple, but she became acquainted with some of the students there and ministry there. And after nursing school, she determined to go to Temple for a year of some Bible training. That's how she would tell it. I think it was primarily her son that years later teased his mom that she really went to Temple for the MRS degree. She was looking for a husband, and it worked. And James Wilson noticed her right away. He actually spoke about her to his friends. And apparently, again, her name was Stetzer, Virginia Stetzer. But her friends, his friends, started referring to her as BW. There's the VW coming, because they thought it was inevitable that Virginia would become Mrs. Wilson. So they were already using those initials. But the problem was he's talking to his friends, but he wouldn't ask her out. And it was actually his friends that were telling him, you better get with it. I actually have some video of sitting in the living room after his death and her telling some of this story. And it's just precious to hear from her perspective. But he finally asked her out. They went to a home-style restaurant named Bee's. And that place served all-you-can-eat fried chicken and vegetables and mashed potatoes. And what Mrs. Wilson remembers is how embarrassed that she was at the massive mound of chicken bones that were left in the wake of how much he ate on the first date. She didn't know what to make of somebody that ate like that. But it wasn't too long into their dating before he told her that he thought that she was going to marry him. And again, I've heard her tell this story and hear her say, I told him, well, I don't know about that. And it took some convincing. And he obviously convinced her. And the Lord gave them 65 wonderful years together. Right after they were married, he was drafted into the army and he was sent to Germany. And he initially told her to stay back and keep the house and the car and all those things cared for. But he had been in Germany not very long when he wrote back and said, forget that, sell what you can and get here as soon as you can. And again, newly married, and she sold everything. And somehow, I haven't heard exactly how this happened, she secured a job as a nurse at a military hospital in Germany and lined up her transportation. And I've heard her tell, how she could see as she's coming in for landing in Germany, and at that point started to think, what have I done? There's people down on the ground, and she was actually thinking, he better be one of those down there. I'm getting on the next plane and going back home. But he was there, and they spent 2 years in Germany, and the Lord gave them their first child there, Elaine. But after returning back from Germany, there really was a laser focus on what the Lord would have for ministry. And the first step in that direction was to be an assistant pastor and song leader in Valdosta, Georgia. And that initial ministry, and they were into it with everything, they paid him $5 a week. Now, I know we're going back a ways, but that was still a very small amount. And but they stayed at it. The pastor in Valdosta was at that time going to minister mostly Sunday afternoons to several families that were trying to form a church in Waycross, Georgia. And at time, it became apparent that that was the Lord's mind for Pastor and Mrs. Wilson. And that small congregation, they ended up being with for 59 years. And initially, there they rented an old house, and the landlord let them renovate it a little bit to use as a church. They moved an Airstream trailer on behind the rental house, and they lived on that property for about 5 years before the Lord allowed them to move and expand, and they were still in that trailer when their son Jim was born. Eventually, they were able to buy an old church that was no longer being used, and then they added a couple of wings for Sunday school space. They built a major addition when they started the school, and been able to look through scrapbooks and see all of that. When some of you were at the funeral this summer for Pastor Wilson, and when we rehearsed some of that, the hard work and frugality and all the projects around the church were just remarkable. But I mentioned that, and I even said this morning, you've heard of frugal people and then very frugal, right? And these were very frugal. The most money Pastor Wilson ever allowed the church to give him, and I'm saying that because here and there were some meetings, and we need to do more, and he capped it off at $225 a week. And I'm talking at the end of 59 years. And I did that. I don't have that written right down, but I think it's like $11,700 was the most he ever allowed that church to pay him. And again, you don't do that in ministry for 59 years without a comment hard about that. They never bought anything new. If it was new, it was because somebody gave it to them, or like Keith said a couple times, one of their sons said, I sent Mom new shoes that we ordered and had delivered. And it was that kind of thing that would be new. She was a master at thrift store shopping, sewed a lot of the clothes that they wore. She would reuse everything that could possibly be reused. And I just listening to them talk about her washing and reusing Solo paper cups until they just couldn't be used anymore. They never bought fresh bread. And if they bought bread, it was discounted, the out-of-date bread. and listening to the kids. They said we didn't know it at the time, but now we understand why we ate so much on toasted bread. Kind of covered up some of that. And I need to skip ahead, but into her 80s, Mrs. Wilson was still mowing the yard at their house and sometimes at the church. And their son, Jimmy, tried to hire someone to mow the lawn for them, but he sent the money, and when he would send the money, Mom would just take the money, put it aside in a drawer, and then she kept on mowing. They actually, when they got down and had to move them, they opened a drawer, and there was a bunch of cash. He said, I don't know how much. We wonder what she was doing with it. And I don't know, there must have been something about the upbringing, but it was just take that and put it aside. And they were putting it aside. Finally, he said, I had to deal straight with a man in the community, and the money go there, and have to tell them, look, I've hired him. He's got the money. Let him mow the lawn, all right? But she kept doing that. I know you can debate, and there is room to debate the pros and cons of all that frugality. But no one doubted that for Mrs. Wilson, it wasn't just old-fashioned. It was, and I don't think it was just fitting her husband. It was partnering with her husband in serving the Lord. And I didn't relate this morning at the funeral because it had as much to do probably with Dad at that point. But again, some of this frugality, Pastor Wilson used envelopes, and again, the cash would go in the envelope, and it'd be labeled for whatever, and he'd set aside and plan. And so one of the times they planned to go up and see his parents, grandparents on Dad's side, for a little vacation in North Carolina. The kids just remember getting back in the car and listening to Mom and Dad say, I'm not sure we have enough gas to get home, and we don't have the money to buy it. And they were just talking about this, listening to him talk yesterday about, how do we ever get there, because Dad always planned. And then they remembered, I think it was a trip where their son actually fell and kind of gashed something right up in his eyebrow, and I think there was a little medical expense to get stitches and stuff, and so that's where they left. So again, they remember that conversation happening, but again, part of the frugality was if they saw anything caught their eye alongside the road, other people would leave their junk, to be picked up by somebody, and if they saw anything that they thought might work for them, they'd stop, and that's what happened. They are going down the road, they see something on the side of the road, they pull over, and they go to look for it. And do you know that in the gravel, while they are looking at this junk, was a $20 bill sitting there? And this is a long time ago. And the kids just remember watching God provide a $20 bill in the gravel on the side of the road. And this is the way they lived and the things they saw the Lord do. Well, one of the standout memories that the kids have is just how much they knew their mom and dad loved each other. And there's a scrapbook I saw in their house that was not just cards on their anniversary, birthday, or so on, but handwritten, personally composed poems for the most part that Pastor Wilson wrote to her. And I flipped through those. Well, they found one that wasn't in that scrapbook I saw, and it was from Mother's Day of 2022. So not quite 2 years ago. And this one wasn't a poem, but again, I'm reading this, handwritten, to my dearest sweetheart, Jeannie. Now, he called her Jean in front of other people. The kids don't remember Jeannie, but this was kind of the written thing. So, to my dearest sweetheart, Jeannie, you are the best treasure on this earth. You are also the best thing that two wonderful children could possibly have. They are like you in so many ways. I thank you for what you have put in them and pray that our God will use them for his glory. I love you with all my heart, Jim. And then at the bottom, he says, may our God use us as well. it was Mother's Day, so would God use our children, but would God use us? And so you get just a little flavor of very recent, again, this kind of a note. And it really was a partnership in serving the Lord. And I alluded to the potential of it just being old-fashioned, and it's not a stretch to say that Pastor and Mrs. Wilson were old-fashioned. They wouldn't be offended by that. I think they'd embrace that. But, some of their ways are probably the product of that. But there's also no doubt it's the product of a genuine, wholehearted desire to honor the Lord. And when they would gift their children or other people Bibles, they would always write in them Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not in thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. And they clearly lived that and urged others to it. It was remarkable that Pastor Wilson went to be with the Lord July 11th of 2023, and she passed away on March 11th of 2024, exactly 7 months later. And I would, just reflecting on the last 7 months for her, would suggest that her decline is even a witness to how much her life's mission was to partner with her husband. Some of you have seen what this dynamic I'll refer to, but sometimes after the death of a spouse that's been fading, for years, the remaining spouse, even while they're mourning that loss, sometimes they will actually rally a bit, physically, mentally. They experience a little bit of release from some of the pressure of all that care. And I remember in my mind wondering if that's what we were going to see with Mrs. Wilson, but in her case, there was no rally, and it was really a steady decline. And I think is more indication, again, that her sense of her purpose for living was really wrapped up in the support of her husband. Even in her decline recently, there's still very clear testimony, though, of her own attachment to the Lord. She still wanted to be in church. When she couldn't be here and it got harder, she wanted to watch the services online. She specifically talked about, actually, Priscilla and Natalie a couple weeks ago playing And Can It Be in a violin duet, and so we had that this morning. She, again, wanted to read the Bible or have it read to her. She'd sing or be humming the hymns. Again, she hummed a lot. And her own personal attachment to the Lord, even in her own loss, was never in question. And I'll add just that as her kids were reflecting, even on her last days, they also emphasized her really lifelong commitment to femininity. And they talk about, even right up to the end, there was hardly a day where she didn't have her hair done and didn't have makeup on. And like Friday, Elaine's husband, Mitch, had gotten home from traveling and wanted to go in and see her, and he thought she had been doing makeup, and he remarked to his wife there was a couple interesting dots on her cheeks, and Elaine went in and said, "Mama, you better look at what you're doing with that makeup." Again. But she was doing that, and what some of the hospice people, those that came in to care for her, said later, she said, "I don't think I've ever been here not seen your mom with her pearls and her earrings." And and they all said, and even her hose. I mean, there was hardly a day where she didn't have those on, and she just, and again, I'd say I'm sure there's something old-fashioned in some of that, but there was also a sense of nobility and an honor of femininity, and really there's a pure, modest femininity that we could use some doses of in our day. And I was headed out today. Actually, I think I already got over here and saw my wife, and she said, "You know why I have that tie on with that little bit of purple?" I didn't know there's purple in my tie, so my wife commented on that. She said, "It's because at her husband's funeral, she was in a beautiful purple dress." And she said, "I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they put her in." I got over there. You know what she's in? That beautiful purple dress. Well, I said something to a few that were around there, and they said this Sunday, she was wanting to know where her purple dress was. And wanted to have that thing on for Sunday, and she watched services even Sunday in the part of the time where she was awake there. It's hard to summarize, of course, 90 years, but those are a few glimpses. And I think, I trust you're hearing, even in just the relating of that, some of these Proverbs 31 themes. And she was just completely loyal to her husband. She did him good and not evil all the days of her life. And the hard work and the frugality, the giving to others, this wholesome femininity, and we could go on. But it is true of Mrs. Wilson, like it was of the Proverbs 31 woman, that everything that is truly commendable came out of this quality of the fear of the Lord. In verse 30, favor is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And it's interesting to get that in the next to last verse of Proverbs, because that is where Proverbs starts as well. I mean, the opening verses in chapter 1 are stating the purpose to impart wisdom. But by the time you get to verse 7, it tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And it's interesting to just explore that term a little bit, the beginning. The fear of the Lord isn't the beginning like, maybe you think of a race, where you're at the starting line and you blast off. Or you could think of a rocket, maybe get a space shuttle up, and once it blasts off, it kind of is cast aside because its purpose is done. But the concept that's being communicated there is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, in the same way that a foundation is the beginning of the house. But everything that comes after that foundation is built upon it, and it continues to impact it. Another illustration that captures this a little bit is like the roots of a plant. And the roots of a plant, maybe that grows into great stature, but if it's going to grow into great stature and be healthy, it has to maintain healthy roots, and it has to continue to have nourishment that comes from that. And that's what the fear of the Lord is. The fear of the Lord is the beginning. It's the foundation, but it's the essence. And you can never get disconnected from that. And really live skillfully, which is what wisdom is in Proverbs. The fear of the Lord includes the concept of reverence. You could explore it several places in Proverbs, but one that stands out is in Psalm 33. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. And that psalm has laid out a number of God's majestic qualities, and then says fear, and let me fill that out. What I mean is stand in awe, revere the majesty, the beauty, the supremacy of God. That's right in that concept of fearing the Lord. But also in that is the actual emotion of dread. There is at one level a genuine apprehension of the consequences of disobedience. Again, we emphasize multiple ways, but one stands out. Proverbs 16:6 says, by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil. When men and women fear the Lord, they don't want to be on the receiving end of God's discipline. But in this concept of dread, it's not just fearing consequences of sin, but it is also dreading a breach or distance in the relationship with God. Abraham, in Genesis 20, he explained some actions he had taken in Egypt. And in Genesis 20, he said, I thought the fear of God is not in this place. This is part of his rationale. He said, I thought these people don't know God. They don't know his ways. They don't desire to please him. So they're going to act in a certain way, and that's why I did what I did. And you put some of these together, the most wholesome displays of the fear of the Lord come from a heart that does know him and loves him. And the heart's desire is to please and not offend because even of the reverence and respect that someone has for him. And this isn't what you'd think of as torment. This isn't terror in that sense. And it's even compatible with childlike love. A small boy that's disciplined properly by a loving father probably has no greater fear in all the world than his daddy's biblical discipline. But in that same boy, there's no object in all the world so desired to be with than that dad. And that's something of an illustration. True love, if you kept thinking of that relationship, true love developed in the life of a child, in the end, it perfects that fear so that it is increasingly pure and wholesome. But the mature fear is not just of suffering negative consequences, right? The mature fear is that of breaking the heart of the one that I love, causing distance in the relationship between me and the one that I so respect and have reverence for. So true love is going to perfect and mature this fear, but this side of heaven, again, it never completely displaces that. And these are the kinds of things. Much more can be explored about what the fear of the Lord is and how it's developed. I actually was thinking initially of taking more time on that. But I ended up finishing with this instead of exploring it further. I actually have some old notes and found at the end of a larger study some practical steps to take in pursuit of the fear of the Lord and developing it. And when I looked at some of these practical steps, I was really touched with how much they have in common with the testimony of Mrs. Wilson. And one of them was just to make personal devotional Bible reading a priority of your day. And I'll send you with this. You could look at multiple other places, but Proverbs 2, the first 7 or so verses talk about if you pursue the wisdom in the word this way, if you treasure it this, then shalt thou understand the fear of the Lord. And that certainly fit her. A second is keep some type of journal for the sake of reminding yourself of God's interaction with your life in the past, and just even aiding the numbering of your days. These things, if you would pursue the fear of the Lord and how it's developed, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. And then just thou, God, seest me, and rehearsing what God's done in life. But another one is even to read biographies of biblically defined God-fearing men and women. And they will encourage you with anecdotes of God's interaction in the life of others, and just stir your own heart to pursue the Lord. And a fourth is put to memory songs with substantial God-centered content. that aid your meditation on the personal works of God. How great thou art. Great is thy faithfulness, we sang tonight. And we could go on. And then a fifth is choose to sit under preaching that gives diligent attention to the word and the very words of God. I have, again, this is an old note I was back reading. Encourage your pastor with hunger for and endurance of sound doctrine. Various ones were part of the taxi service when the Wilsons couldn't drive. And the Berries, and I would often trade different times, but it was common for me if I was picking them up on a Sunday night to be driving back over here for Mrs. Wilson to even want to talk to me about the message from Sunday morning. And she was an earnest listener to the preaching. So I thought, these are not just steps to take, but they really are descriptions of this lady. That by the grace of God, was a woman that feared the Lord. And because she's a woman that feared the Lord, she is a woman worthy of praise. And I was stirred a couple specific points of application. We had a number of our young ladies were there earlier, and we have young ladies here as well. And I do just want to say, young ladies, here's a model to follow. Here's a very honorable model to follow. And I would say to all single young men, I would also say this. Here's the kind of woman to marry. There's the kind to marry. Favor is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And if the Lord would find such a virtuous woman for any of you men, what a treasure. Her price would be far above rubies. And so ask God to give you such a wife, a partner for your life in his will. Well, I'm going to stop there. I will tell you that they live streamed the funeral, and they told us that in a couple days they'll have a link up so you can go back and watch, and we'll try to get that link out, and you can go to it. But let's just thank the Lord for the gift of the Wilsons and the blessing that they have been to us for the last couple of years. Some of you that don't know, again, he was in a steady decline, a liver condition, and multiple other things combining. He had lost the last year or so 70 pounds. He was still trying to pastor that church. The kids kept saying, "Dad, you can't keep doing this." And a Sunday morning, he started to go off the platform after he had preached, and he passed out. And an ambulance took him to Jacksonville, Florida, and they never went home again. And the kids said, "That's it, Dad. You're coming here. You're moving to Easley." And they are attending churches that, and they are attending churches, and they believe a number of them know the Lord, but they weren't the kind of church that Mom and Dad would want to be at. And they said, "Well, you pull us up here, and we're going to church. We're going to a good church, the kind of church we want to be at." And so we'd had some connection through the school to the family in the past, and they said, "Well, we think maybe this is the one." So they brought him here. He was still very sick. I mean, barely out of the hospital. And actually, there was a new round. It wasn't the peak of COVID, but there was a new round of COVID. And the parents tried to tell him, you probably, the kids tried to tell him, "You probably shouldn't be at church yet." And "We're going to church." It's like a day after they landed here. And he was here. He could hardly hear anything. He didn't have his hearing aids. They didn't come with him yet. But he is going to be in church, and that was their mindset. And I'm going to go ahead and say this. And one of the reasons I'm still wearing a tie on Wednesday nights is because of that first service. So Samuel had actually talked to me and said, "Dad, you think maybe, summer, Wednesday nights, do I always need to have a tie? And I said, Sam, I don't mind. If you don't wear a tie, nobody has to wear a tie. I'm kind of thinking I should probably wear a tie. And so honestly, I got home, and I don't think Samuel and my wife had compared notes. And my wife actually said, honey, are you sure you need to wear a tie now? Wednesday night, summer. And I said the same thing. I don't care if nobody else wears a tie. I was considering it, but I thought, as soon as I take one off, somebody's going to show up and be disappointed, right? So that day, that night, the Wilsons were here. It's the only time he came to church in like a polo shirt. But it's because they had taken him straight from the hospital, didn't even have their clothes. And I went over to meet him, and he said, I don't have my hearing aids, so I couldn't hear you. And I'm so embarrassed I don't have my tie on tonight in church. Please forgive me. And I'm like, I'm glad I wore that tie. I'm going to keep it on for at least a little while, so you'll have to put up with me in a tie for a little longer. But what a blessing their lives have been. And we need to thank the Lord for the challenge and what God's given us as a treasure here in these last few months.